Hey guys, and welcome to the Woven Energy Podcast with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. We're here once again to talk about shamanism from the ground up. This is going to be our first Q&A session. I'm really excited about this. You've all been sending me your questions in, so I thought it'd be really good to get a few of them answered and get a proper Q&A session going. So one thing I did want to say before we get going is that maybe the answers to your questions might not be what you were expecting. And if you've been listening to the podcast so far, you might now be familiar with Damon's style and his outlook on shamanism, but this can be a good thing. So hopefully Damon can give you a few things to think about. So our first question comes from Stuart, and Stuart asks, is there aspects of energy work in shamanism, e.g. microcosmic orbit, etc.?
Before you put the EG on the end, then the answer was definitely yes. The microcosmic and macrocosmic orbits are part of the exotericism of Qigong and associated arts in China. They definitely have come out of if you want to use the word energy, the energy work that's in shamanism. They've come out of that, but they're certainly not, the energy work that's in shamanism is certainly not bound by that. In, I think, the same way that you would find in, for instance, Chinese Qigong culture today. You find a lot of exotericism. So, shamanism is very much concerned with energy. I mean, shamanism sees the entire universe as a weave of energy. The problem we have with all of these words that we use when we put labels on things, that word energy, it means different things to different people. So this very simple answer to the question is yes, there's a lot, and we'll be going over some of this. It is effectively the basis of spirit dance, the energy that moves inside a human being. You call that the microcosm, possibly, and the energy that's moving inside nature or changing with inside nature, the macrocosm. Then definitely, yes, shamanism's about that. As with all of these terms, I have a slight concern over what things, the words like the microcosmic orbit mean in terms of, for instance, in Taoism, and what exoteric ideas people might attach to that. But the simple answer to the question is yes.
Fantastic. Okay. And he has another question as well. He says, what personal benefits have you experienced through your studies?
Oh my goodness. I have a completely different life. I could see, if I go back to sort of 1985, if shamanism hadn't happened in my life, I can see the kind of life I would have had, and frankly, I feel, we talked about the goddess Inari and how she kills her followers with kindness. I can't even compare the two lives. I saw it because, because of my experience in shamanism, I can sort of see what I would be doing today. I may be dead, frankly. My health certainly wouldn't be good. And I certainly would, have ended up being a cog in a wheel. I was, as I said one time, I think when I came out of school, or maybe we haven't launched that podcast yet. But when I came out of school, I'd been given this aspiration to become a technician. So I came out of school looking to be a technician, and I achieved that quite quickly. But it wasn't the amazing, satisfying career that I thought it was going to be. But I think I would have still been doing that. I think I would have been an incredibly antisocial person. I certainly wouldn't be going around hugging people, which is, Joy will probably attest. I'm quite a warm, open person. I certainly wasn't that way in 1985.
I've heard the stories about you.
Yeah, some people who knew me way back when, and
It's interesting you're saying, though, that shamanism, I mean, we know the term shamanism, it's such a big topic, but that it helped you with your physicality or your comfort in your physicality.
Oh, I'm 100% certain that my health would be dreadful if I was still here. 100% certain of that if it hadn't been for this happening to me. I feel eternally blessed. I don't think my personal relationships would be anywhere as good and vibrant as they are. I wouldn't have that hole filled. The nature in my life being a part of nature, which is the thing that makes me happy when I get up in the morning. I wouldn't have any of that. I hate to think, frankly, but I'm so glad and so pleased and so grateful. That's all I can say. And when we talked about, in animism, the idea of spirits are just human conceptualizations of aspects of nature. And I know full well that the goddess Inari is not a person, and she's not, I know she's my own personal and several other people, many other people's conceptualization of that bountiful, enlivening, vital aspect of nature that tends to make our lives full and great and colourful and flavoursome. I know it's just my conceptualization of that, but even so, I am so grateful to that conceptualization in all of its forms, in exoterism. I feel so blessed and grateful. I don't know what else to say about that, except that, my life is completely different, transformed. I'm trying to think of similarities. There's not much.
Do you think people are generally quite confused these days, living in a civilized society, and that shamanism can reconnect us with our
Here's what I think
selves?
about that. Coming back to the question, the same question. I think I certainly was, at that age, 18 or so. I was like a lot of people. I was a cork in a river, and that river was flowing me away down to the sea, and it was a powerful river. And that's where that river was going. It seemed to me, and I guess I felt, looking back on it, I wouldn't think about it at the time, but I guess I was a creature of circumstance. I let life happen to me. And I bought into a lot of things, like the great promise of society. I thought that, being this amazing technician, I'd make loads of money, and I'd have a brilliant car, and I would have a nice house, and all this kind of stuff, all that kind of stuff that people think will satisfy them, and actually doesn't. And that's why, greed in many ways has no satiation. Materialism has no satiation. The promise is that, having a nice car, having a nice watch, having a nice house, all of those kind of things, those things that we can work hard, make money and buy, the promise that will satisfy us, and it never does. I quite regularly used to drive through a particular village, I'm not going to say which one, where a lot of quite wealthy people retire to. And I'd often go through the marketplace when a lot of people are milling around buying expensive objects to put in their houses, and I'm thinking, they're not young, some of these people, and I'm thinking, you've been buying things all your life to make you happy, and you're not happy yet with all the things that you bought, when are you going to be happy? And the answer is never, because materialism, although it's a very effective, very, very effective technique for building societies, for organizing societies, for building power, political power, exoteric power, religious power. Although it's an incredibly powerful basis for that, it's not an incredibly powerful basis for, simple things like being happy. The fact that more than one person actually, the fact that some people were kind enough to show me a different side, I just feel so blessed.
Okay. This question is a very interesting one. I think this is a really good question. It's very relevant to what we've been talking about. And it's from someone called Dave. And he says, why are the roots of the tree associated with the mind? I've re-listened to the podcasts, and this aspect of Damon's point of view is still unclear to me. Thank you.
Sure. And you're probably asking for a roots of the tree answer to that question as well. The roots of the tree really are not associated with the mind. The roots of the tree have to do with, in the Great Cycle, they have to do with the results of what has gone before. The propensity of a miasmatic people, like modern civilized human beings, is to one of the issues there, I was about to make reference to a previous podcast, but of course we haven't released the podcast yet. The podcast about animism and the follow-up podcast. But those podcasts will probably answer the question quite well. To cut a long story short, the results of what has gone before in a miasmatic society become a bigger focus than there would be in, for instance, a society of eagles. A group of eagles. Eagles are incredibly intelligent birds, which is one of the reasons why very, very few people use them for falconry. The basic premise of falconry or training in falconry is that, all birds of prey are very, very clever. They need to be. And they quickly realize that these things called human beings have food. So a bird of prey, like say a peregrine falcon, that's trained for falconry, the basic premise of that training is that the human wants the peregrine to behave in a way that's not a million miles away from how a peregrine behaves anyway. They go hunting things. But when the peregrine finds that the human being's really happy when it does all these tricks and does all these things, it's probably quite pleased that it's able to show off its amazing ability on one level, but on the other level, it gets fed. And it's a very, very basic proposition. The problem with eagles is eagles are extremely intelligent. They are intelligent enough that basic proposition doesn't always work with them. And the few people, as we talked about, there are some people in the Western Mongolia who actually fly eagles regularly after foxes. Of course, we haven't talked about that yet. I think, as Joel attests, I'm not the greatest at doing these podcasts, these recordings out of order. But I refer you to the podcast on the series of podcasts we do later on animism and human evolution and our relationship to animals. Eagles are extremely intelligent. And they think about the world. We talked about spirit animals. They think about the world in a totally different way, or they experience the world in a totally different way to how we do. They do not indulge in the what has gone before in the same way that we do. So on that level, they don't sit around thinking about strategy, about what they're going to do tomorrow, about what other people are thinking of them. And this makes them incredibly difficult to train. They have a degree of subtlety, but they have a degree of subtlety in a way of a type of intelligence that is completely alien to us. And the people who do use eagles for falconry, those very, very rare people in the world, they have to take on, to a certain extent, the spirit of the eagle and understand the eagle's way of looking at the world. One of the things should highlight our obsession with memes rather than genes is the fact that if you take a very, very intelligent human being who's heavily socially conditioned in our Western civilized society, and you ask him to sit for an entire day, thinking of nothing and staring out over a scene in front of him, he will find that incredibly difficult, because he's always indulging in what's gone before. He's always ruminating on the past and the things that he's learned and the things that he's been taught to be. If you ask a extremely experienced, say, golden eagle to sit on a perch looking at that scene all day, it will sit there quite happily, despite the fact that it's extremely intelligent. It won't feel a need to exercise its mind, even though it's perfectly able to do so. But what I really want to do with this particular question is just ask that you hang fire for some of the later podcasts. The podcast on human evolution and the domestication of the dog, subsequent podcasts on animism, and the very latest one that we've recorded, number 12, will answer that very good question. Very, very good question. I hope in a lot more detail.
Yeah. To crystallize it then, just very briefly, because you when you first started answering the question, you said he's probably looking for a roots of the tree answer, and so from your answer,
which is what they got.
Yeah. But from your answer, what I got from that is that roots of the tree, the mind is about logical thinking, rational thinking, reasoning. It's how we
based
think
on what has gone
navigate.
before. Reasoning is often based on, or more often than not, reasoning, but based on something. It's based on memes, not genes. It's based on what has gone before. And what I'm saying is that an eagle will only do that when it's absolutely called for. Typically, it doesn't feel any need to do that. What I'm suggesting is that civilized human beings feel a need to do that, irrespective of whether it's appropriate or not.
Okay, this is from a keen listener called Sven, who's got quite a few questions. He says, thank you for the podcasts, first of all. And he asks, I've heard that there are shamans that can harm people, send spirits to hurt them or control them. Is this true? And where does it come from?
It's certainly true that there are shamans who can harm people. In terms of the question about can they send spirits to hurt people, in a way they can. The way that the black shamans typically hurt people is that the black shamans have a deep understanding and deeply steeped in the miasma, whereas the people that they hurt are not deeply steeped in the miasma, don't have a deep recognition of it, and black shamans use that against them. You could describe that as sending spirits at them, but I don't mean that in an exoteric way. But yes, yeah, absolutely, black shamans can hurt people. There's no doubt about that. I'd also refer you to our podcast about where we mentioned bonobos. The answer to that question is yes, shamans can hurt people, and it could be interpreted that they're sending spirits to hurt them. What they're actually doing is manipulating the miasma, which they're deeply aware of, and the person they're hurting isn't.
Okay, Sven asks his second question. I've heard about shamanic initiations. Do they have to go through one, and what did you have to go through one, and what did it entail?
Again, as we've discussed in another one of the podcasts that we haven't released yet, the initiations are not part of the shamanism of animistic peoples. Initiation ceremonies are part of the miasma of animistic peoples. As I think I've mentioned, animistic peoples still have the miasma, they just don't have it as strongly as we do, especially when they're pastoralists. I think the people who have it the lightest in the modern world are actually the hunter-gatherers, the few hunter-gatherers that are still around. Those initiation ceremonies are all part of the miasma trying to control their society. They have been added to shamanism. No shamans among any other species than human beings. Again, referring to podcasts that we haven't released yet. No shamans among species other than human beings require or do initiation ceremonies. They are completely part of the miasma and have nothing whatever to do with animism, except that you will find them now, 4 million years after the event, in animistic societies that have already discovered the miasma.
Okay.
But the answer is yes, I have been through those things, and they're one of the things you have to go through.
Yeah. So what would be another way of describing an actual initiation if we're going to distance it from what we might call the miasma?
Well, the thing that proves that they're complete nonsense, there's only one way in which they're not nonsense. The thing that proves they're complete nonsense is they're all completely different from each other. You know, as we've said, wherever you look all around the world, shamanism, it's all the same. But these initiation ceremonies, they're all different. Or ways of initiation, they're all different. You know, you've got the shaman sickness, and you've got people sticking things through themselves, hanging themselves, this kind of hanging themselves from trees, going out into the jungle for however long. The one way where I think they're slightly legitimate is that, which is one of the things that's been used on me, is that just simply the apprentice being given an opportunity to prove himself to the shaman. What a shaman doesn't want to do is invest 6 months to a year of effort into somebody who's just going to, not take it seriously and, just walk away or get bored of it, So it's the only useful purpose they serve, is that purpose, is to make sure the student is serious. To me, they're completely pointless nonsense on the whole.
Cool. In true Damon fashion, that's a fantastic answer.
On the other hand, it depends what you mean by initiation. If you're talking about the fact that does the apprentice come to some point in time where he lets go of the baseline and starts to behave in a more animistic way, starts to see the value in the midline and top line, and starts behaving and conducting his life accordingly on the basis that he's re-engineered that has quite a drastic effect on the apprentice's life. It did on mine. To a certain extent, it's probably had a reasonably big impact on your life. If you want to call that an initiation, then yeah, that's part of shamanism. There's no way of avoiding that if you want to become a shaman.
Okay, and Sven's third question and final question is, what is a spirit guide or spirit animal? Are they real or imagined? I want to say that we have done an episode on the word spirit and what it really means, and that's episode 5. I think if you're asking this question, you'll get a lot out of that episode, but by all means, over to you, Damon.
Spirit animals are real in an esoteric way, and they are absolutely not real in an exoteric way. As I think we've said, and we certainly will be going over in huge detail in later podcasts, spirit animals are the spirit of real animals that is taken on by the shaman in order to look at the world through different eyes. They are absolutely not supernatural creatures that live in the spirit world and come to us with revelations about things. They are parts of human beings that are based on the spirit of real animals in the real world.
Fantastic.
Flesh and blood animals.
And we've talked about this, it's chillicity as well. We observe the animals in a state of chillicity and absorb their environmental niche, so to speak, and try and place that over.
Well, it's not their environmental niche that we absorb, it's their way they fill their lives out. If you like, the shape that's made by their lives. If you think of, a child putting a block, those toys where there's holes with different blocks and different shapes, like a star and a triangle and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. If you think of the environmental niche as one of those holes, the animal makes a suitably shaped block with its spirit, with its life that goes into that hole. That's what we take on in the state of chillicity. It's the block.
Yeah. And that is very much real. That's very much real.
Well, it comes from a real place, as I said. Yeah. It comes from real animals in the real world. And if you're a shaman, there's two ways you can get that. You can get it from a teacher. To a certain extent, you can get it from a teacher who has taken on that spirit, or their teacher's teacher and so on, who's taken on that spirit from real animals in the real world. Or you can take it from real animals in your real world yourself. If neither of those two things have happened, then it's delusional.
Brilliant. On to the next. So this is from somebody called Mark Moreno, and he feels that you and he both have the same intuition about the connection between shamanism and the ancient Chinese martial arts. So
Sure.
this question is actually, the two questions that he's asking are good. There's three questions he's asking. The first two are really good, and I think they do apply outside of the martial arts. But to put them into a context, he's saying, my question's about the two very key mind states in my training. The first 20 minutes of my training are what we call entering the silence. It's like ancient Anapanasati Buddhist Sutra or modern mindfulness teachings. Just focusing in my breath, relaxing myself as much as possible, and aligning with spines and limbs with gravity. And now his question is, can you ask Damon about specific shamanic exercises to reach this no mind state? Maybe I can adapt those to my training.
Sure. The Japanese word that's very famous is munen muso, no mind, no conception. Very famous in the martial arts. All of the exercises that we've talked about in terms of chelicity are answers to the question. So we've already released some of those, I believe. But I think the very next episode 6, which will be released probably before this thing is released, will probably answer that question in some detail. Although it's a review of a lot of different Michuan, what's called Michuan in China, which are exercises that are simply extensions. Shamanic exercises that are simply extensions of chelicity. The pitfall that I would warn people against in terms of that, as we've said, Buddhist meditation, Zen meditation, which is a Chan in Chinese. It's a Buddhist sect that actually got started in China. That's very big on non-imaginative meditation. That's a really sound basis for shamanism, as that kind of training is a very sound basis for shamanism, as long as you don't buy into isolationism. Some people in Buddhist circles, I'm not saying everybody, but some people in Buddhist circles extend that idea to the idea that you should cut off yourself from attachment. Yeah, this idea of removing yourself from attachment. That in my view of the world, in my view based on my shamanic training, I see those two things as not related to each other. I see the idea that you cut yourself off from attachment in order to relieve human suffering. That I see as a philosophical idea. The Zen idea of quieting the mind, stilling the mind, in order to come in touch with a reality that already exists both in and outside of you, I see that as a deeply animistic and shamanistic idea. So I do myself draw a distinction between those two things, whereas I don't think that distinction is always acknowledged when we talk about concepts like Munen Muso, no mind, no conception. So yes, virtually all shamanic exercise has an aspect of chelicity, and the exercises that we've given out so far are all based on that, and all the exercises we ever will give out will all be based on that. But chelicity is not the be-all and end-all of shamanism, I think, as we've said.
Yeah. So would you say it's more about understanding actually really how simple it is and not complicating the process of starting out and meditation? Because we use the word meditation. We've talked about that word before, about all the different ideas that people have about meditation. But really, it's about clearing the mind, focus on your breath, and do it for as long as it takes.
Yeah, I suspect that the person asking the question has some understanding of what's going on here. So what I would say was the need, in for instance, in Muna Nuso, there is no, or in Tai Chi, this is called man. Sometimes described or mistranslated as slowness. But actually what it is it's a non-attachment to the past, and it's no desire for the future. It's kind of hanging in the moment. And that is a really, really sound basis for shamanism. So, the most basic of all shamanistic techniques is to empty your mind, use the rhythm of the drum as a focus to stop other thoughts coming into your mind. But the thing that shouldn't be missed in any of those type of exercises, that's probably the most basic shamanistic technique there is. The thing that shouldn't be missed is that doesn't stop at the surface of the body, or that doesn't stop inside your head. You are like a tea bag in the ocean. The water that's outside of you and the water that's inside of you are one and the same water. You are certainly not cutting yourself off or trying to separate yourself from the spirit, from the energy that's outside of you. Just the opposite. You are trying to become part of that weave. Now, there are various different levels at which Buddhism can be understood. One of the things that I've done in these podcasts to date, all the way up to episode 12, is I've bent over backwards to avoid mentioning Mongolian Buddhism, which sooner or later we're going to have to tackle, unfortunately. The problem with Buddhism is there is so much stuff in it. There's so much stuff in it that has animistic, shamanistic origins. But there's so much extra stuff in it as well. And the so much stuff in it that has animistic origins is very, very useful for animism and shamanism, and there's so much extra stuff is not, frankly. So for shamanism, Buddhism is a real can of worms. It's a very, very difficult subject to deal with on a conceptual level, because on the one hand, if you hear me talking about Buddhism, it might sound like I'm praising it on the one hand, and I'm rejecting it on the other hand, at one and the same time. And Buddhism likes those paradoxes anyway, so that's probably not certainly Zen, some of the quants. But yeah, so Buddhism is a real can of worms for shamanism and animism. And what I would promise is we won't shy away from it. We will do at least one episode on it. That will be Mongolian Buddhism in future, but I don't want to go there until people have got a lot of foundation on what we're talking about.
Fantastic. Okay. The second part to his first question is in the other 40 minutes that he spends in what he calls Zhangzhuang. I use visual imagery to enhance my proprioception and to put gradually my postural muscles under conscious control. Normally, we humans can't do this without this type of training, he says. So can you ask him, Damon, about visualization exercises in shaman traditions? Maybe I can test those in my training. I have a feeling about your answer to this one, Damon. Okay.
Well, look, visualization, okay? It can be used by shamans. It is used by shamans, okay? It can be used. The problem with visualization is just like the problem with Buddhism, in terms of its relationship to animism and shamanism. Is there are two aspects to Buddhism, one of which is negative and one of which is positive with respect to shamanism, and there are two aspects of visualization, one of which is negative and one of which is positive with respect to shamanism. Visualization used as a tool when it's acknowledged as such, and it's understood that that's all it is, and the shaman is consciously in a conscious and disciplined way using that for a particular purpose. can be used as a tool of shamans, can and is be used as a tool by shamans, and I've done that myself. The problem is the miasma is so heavily attached to the social conditioning that we have around visualization that I encourage, probably ceaselessly, the people who I try to help with shamanism to stay away from that subject as long as humanly possible. I'm not saying it's not going to be valuable to them in future. What I'm saying is that the propensity for the miasma to come out whenever anybody who's certainly untrained, which I suspect the person asking the question does have a level of training, but these podcasts go out to everybody. Anybody who doesn't have the discipline, any of the discipline that's associated with this stuff, my advice is stay away from visualization if you want to start to understand shamanism. Later on, when you've taken on the discipline of a shaman, remember we talked about bat, toshaltin, and guchach.
Yeah.
When you've taken on the level of bat necessary to use visualization as a useful, productive, and what I mean by productive, it gets results tool in shamanism, then fine. I would say you're an intermediate to advanced person if you're in that stage. If you're not there, I'd just ask you to stay away from it.
So hang fire for exercises. Definitely, in as regards to visualization, just hang fire. Definitely get a much more firm foundation.
Well, it depends. It depends who the listener is to the podcast. This is one of the things we said about esotericism in general. Esotericism is taught on a personal, one-to-one basis, and shamans have always modified their teaching, modified what they teach to the person who's listening. Now, I suspect the person asking the question actually has some understanding, some level of understanding. What I mean by understanding, mind, spirit, and body all acting as one, not just the baseline. But I caution people, I caution myself, let alone anybody else, against visualization as a tool. If you're going to use visualization as a tool, make sure that when you're using visualization as a tool, you have the most titanic grasp and hook into the natural world and into reality that acts as a counterweight to the fact that as soon as you start visualizing, the miasma is going to come along and jump on that. It's going to pounce on it.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to point out as well, you mentioned Bat, Toshaltin and Guchach. We have episodes 7, 8 and 9, which is our little mini-series on that, where we've gone very in-depth into those three. So hang fire for those as well. If you're listening to this episode when they've already been released, then go listen to it. They're really, really good. Okay, and I think this is a great question to end the episode on. And I know you've got an opinion on this because you've talked to me about it. So he says, finally, this is a curiosity from many years ago. What is the percentage of truth in Castaneda's writings? Are pure crap, he says, question mark, or what, question mark.
Oh, come on. This is going to start, what do they call it? A flame war. Okay, I'm going to be honest, but I'm going to be nice.
Yeah.
I'll try to be. There is something in the first book. There is something realish. There's somebody somewhere has influenced him with respect to the first book, Teachings of Don Juan. Somebody knowledgeable has influenced him. I suspect that my opinion is that, I don't want anybody to sue me or anything. My opinion is that the degree of that influence was much less than is portrayed. He talks about meeting Don Juan in a bus stop, as I recall. Don't get me wrong, it's a book I love. Yeah, I love that book as a book. I always had a feeling, or for many years I've had a feeling, is that the meeting in the bus stop was the only meeting he had with Don Juan. That's my personal opinion. I could be wrong. The guy's a wonderful, wonderful, inspirational writer. So, and one of the things that people have done in one of the things that people have done in esotericism over the years is they've created myths in order to influence society, and in esoteric groups, famously the Prairie de Sion, were into this stuff in a big way, making myths in order to influence culture and society. Pierre Plantard and those guys. They came up with stuff that an exoteric person, that a scientist or whoever would say is complete rubbish, and can be historically proven to be false. But did they ever influence society? But not to the degree that Carlos Castaneda has. So yes, I believe there's a little something in there, and that he did meet a shaman one day. But it may only, in my opinion, it may only be in a third day. But don't think that makes me not like Carlos Castaneda. I think the guy's a brilliant, brilliant writer. And I would happily read his books just as literature, nothing other than that, and an inspirational writer.
Well, I completely agree. I've read I haven't read any of the others. I've only read the first book, The Teachings of Don Juan, and I did enjoy it, I must admit. I thought it was a very good book. And like you were saying, even from, I think it was a few years ago now, and we'd been doing shamanism for not very long. And even then I could tell there was something in it, but yeah, it was only glimpses, very, very small little glimpses. And even then when I was reading it, I was having to reference it back to kind of what you were saying. So
do you know what's sad is if he'd build it like Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, if he'd build it as a work of fiction, nobody would criticize him. We'd be all saying what a brilliant writer he is, what an inspirational writer he is, And maybe that was a mistake and maybe it wasn't. But I'm a big fan of Carlos Castaneda as an author. So don't think that I don't like him. I do. I just, that's my opinion on his, shamanism in real life. But, is he a better writer than me? You bet he is. Yeah.
Well, I have the same opinion. Thank you so much, Damon. That's been fantastic. If you've got any more questions, send them over to joe@wovenenergy.com. That's joe@wovenenergy.com. We'll do a few of these. We'll carry on with the episodes for a good while yet, and until we do the next one. But thank you very much, Damon. And I'm sure, everybody who's had their questions answered thanks you as well. And so we'll see you next time. Look out for the next episode. Cheers, guys.
Cool. Thanks.